Right. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a good Thursday so far. I'm going to go ahead and pre-record this lecture because I will be flying to Minnesota during your class period. So I'm going to pick up where we left off on the horse lecture and try to get through this. And then I'm also going to try to finish the companion animal lecture, which is chapter 6 after that, but we'll just see kind of what happens and where we are. So to kind of go over some terminology for horses, the process of giving birth in horses is called foaling, and therefore a newborn horse is called a foal. Young horses up to their first birthday are called weanlings, and a young horse after its first birthday is called a yearling. So that one's pretty easy. It's a year old, so then it's called a yearling from that point on. A female horse that's 3 years old or less is called a filly, and a male horse 3 years old or less is called a colt. A mare is an adult female horse 4 years old or greater, and a stallion or horse is an intact adult male that's 4 years old or greater, and a gelding is a castrated adult male horse that's 4 years old or greater. So there are some breeding challenges that you might face if you're trying to breed horses. So drugs that are used illegally in racing may interfere with reproduction. And another thing to consider is that the birth date of horses set by many breed associations in the Northern Hemisphere is January 1st. So therefore, you want your foals to be born as early as possible in the year so that they can achieve the maximum possible growth before they become yearlings. Therefore, breeders will sometimes attempt to breed horses outside of their normal breeding season. So that would need to be controlled if that's what you wanted to do. So horses can be pretty susceptible to stress, like some other animals as well. So when horses are stressed, blood concentrations of the stress hormone cortisol will be increased, and this could occur especially during transportation and during treadmill exercises in horses. A large percent of performance horses actually will develop or could develop gastric ulcers, and those are thought to be stress-related. Severe stress may change the nutritional requirements of an animal because when the body is stressed, different energy is going to different things in the body, so it may be slightly shifted away from growth and shift to more of a maintenance if the body is stressed and kind of shutting down a little bit. So that will definitely change their nutritional requirements, so that's something to also consider. And horses are also susceptible to problems with glucose balance. So glucose tolerance tests are performed to determine the body's ability to utilize glucose. And those tests are performed in people as well, particularly people that are developing diabetes or at risk for diabetes. So that's another problem that horses can get. So a little bit about horse genetics. Horses have 64 chromosomes, and the maps of the genomes of the horse have been reported. The mare not only provides half of the chromosomes of the offspring, but she also provides mitochondrial DNA as well, which is the DNA that's found in the mitochondria, which if you have had biology, is kind of the powerhouse of the cell. It creates energy. So in most species, the mitochondrial DNA is provided by the mother. So mitochondria have their own DNA, and then you have the regular DNA in the nucleus of the cell. So there's evidence that part of the mitochondrial DNA, the part known as the D loop, actually affects horse racing performance. So that could be kind of something to look for when considering which horses you're going to breed. This is just a picture of the equine digestive tract, so we're going to kind of move into nutrition. So just to point out a couple of things in this picture, so you have the lips and teeth up here, and then you have the very long esophagus, which is going to go to the stomach, which can hold about 8 to 19 quarts, so fairly good size. Then you have the small intestine, which is really long, so 70 feet, that's packed in there and kind of twisted and kind of all just compacted in there to be able to fit. And then you have the cecum, which lies on the right side of the abdominal cavity, which is pretty important in horses, and as well as a large colon. and then you have the small colon, and then you have the rectum. So that's just to give you kind of idea of the digestive tract. It's similar to other animals, and now we're going to talk a little bit more specifics about the horse and how it digests its food and what it eats. So horses are classified as non-ruminants or monogastrics, which means that they have a simple stomach. They're different from ruminants because, as we'll learn later, ruminants have a stomach with 4 compartments. So non-ruminant, monogastric, mono, one stomach. So that's something really that you'll need to remember because that's really important. They are also herbivores, which means that they eat a diet consists of plants. So you probably know carnivores eat meat, omnivores eat both, and herbivores eat plants. So horses are in the herbivore category. And horses are also in the category known as hindgut fermenters. So that means that most of their fermentation is occurring in the cecum and the colon. So they have microorganisms in the cecum and the colon that break down cellulose from the food that they eat and produce volatile fatty acids, as well as microbial protein. So these volatile fatty acids can be used for energy and things like that. And the microbial protein a little bit, but not as much as it plays a role in the ruminant, because once the microbial protein is created in the cecum and the colon of the horse, unfortunately, all of the areas to digest that microbial protein were prior to that point in the digestive system. So they actually do not benefit a whole lot from that microbial protein. But volatile fatty acids can be absorbed from the cecum and the colon of the horse, so those can be beneficial. So meeting nutritional requirements are essential for optimal performance of horses and any other animal. Horses require energy, protein, vitamins, minerals, and water. And in a maintenance situation, nutritional requirements can be met by hay or grazing pastures. So what I mean by maintenance is that your horse is at an ideal body condition state, which we'll talk about in the next few slides. So in maintenance, your horse is not trying to lose weight, and it's also not needing to gain weight. It's just maintaining all of the regular body functions that it has, and it's just maintaining that weight and that state. So that's what the term kind of maintenance means. Some good grasses for pastures for horses include orchard grass, reed canary grass, and brome grass. So for performance, pregnancy, lactation, and growth, they also will need concentrates. So concentrated feeds contain cereals, the cereal grains that we've talked about a little bit earlier, such as oat, corn, or wheat as an energy source. And so concentrates are really important because they can provide a lot of that energy to meet requirements. So you know how I just talked about maintenance requirements. When an animal is a performance animal or they're pregnant or lactating, those nutritional requirements will shift and they need more energy to be able to maintain their current state. So now I'm going to talk about body condition score, which I just mentioned previously. And this is something that is really important, especially if you have your own livestock that you're taking care of. It's really important to kind of know how to manage them and how to feed them, and body condition score is a good way to help you do that. So it's a useful management tool for determining the nutritional needs of your livestock. It focuses on critical areas of the body, depending on which animal you're looking at, and it's based on palpable fat and visual appearance. So for horses, their body condition score system usually ranges from 1 to 9, depending on which scale is used. Some scales may be, 1 to 7 or something like that, so it kind of depends. But typically they're 1 to a number, and 1 is usually very, very thin, and then 9 would be extremely obese. So on the 1 to 9 scale, the ideal score that you want your horse to be at would be between a 5 and a 6. So the only kind of exception to this rule is that brood mares you want ideal to be between 5 to 7 for optimum reproductive efficiency. Because if that mare is going to be bred and then she's going to be going through gestation and everything, more energy is going to be needed to be able to help the fetus grow and everything like that. So if she's up to a 7 body condition score, then that's not a problem. So to kind of show you visually what I'm talking about, so up here on the top left, we have a body condition score of 1, and you can see that the neck is very thin, you can see the ribs, you can see the hip bones, everything's kind of poking out there, and then as we increase in numbers, the ribs kind of start to go away, you don't see those anymore, and then by the time you get to a 5 and a 6, which are ideal, you're not seeing the ribs at all. And you can kind of start to see some muscle definition happening in the 5 and 6. And then even 7 is not too bad. You can start to see on the neck just a little bit of extra fat there and muscle. So once you get up to an 8 and a 9, you can see that those horses are extremely obese. And that's a situation where you could run into issues like founder, and you need to really be able to manage that horse to bring it back down. Obesity will put extra pressure on the joints and cause all sorts of other health problems, as will them being too thin. So it's really good to know what body condition score your horse is at and how to feed them properly to be able to take them either way to get back to ideal. So how should horses be housed? Horses require shelter for protection against adverse weather conditions such as cold rains, sleet, snow, and extremely low temperatures. You could construct a shelter on well-drained land and provide dry storage for feed and tack. That's important because you don't want their feed to get wet because then it's going to get moldy. You could cover clay or wood floors of stalls with wood shavings, sawdust, or straw for bedding, and cushion for horses' hooves. That's really important to keep them comfortable. And then always make sure that you're cleaning stalls to remove soiled bedding. So especially if they're in there and there's a lot of wet bedding, there could be a lot of ammonia that's coming off that the horse is breathing in from its urine and things. So always make sure that you are cleaning the stalls as best you can. So there are many different breeds of horses. So we're going to talk about a few that are the most popular breeds in the United States. And the number one most popular breed in the United States is the quarter horse. That's followed by the thoroughbred, then the standardbred, the Appaloosa, and the Arabian. So these 5 breeds represent 75% of all of the horse registrations in the U.S. So they're extremely popular. So the quarter horse is a light horse breed, and it's the number 1 horse breed in the U.S., like I just said. Its foundation stock was the English Thoroughbred and native Chickasaw. And in the colonial era, when horse racing was becoming popular, races were a quarter mile or less. So people wanted an animal that was a sprinter, or what was called a quarter miler. So they were used for riding, showing, racing, and as stock horses. And they were also used during the westward expansion in the United States. Quarter horses can come in many colors. They're used for riding, showing, racing, and stock horses, like I said. The breed association for quarter horses is the American Quarter Horse Association, and currently there are over 3 million horses registered with that association. So they're very popular, and you can see this picture. They're just a good, beautiful, overall well-balanced horse that are good for a lot of different things. So the second most popular horse breed is a thoroughbred, and thoroughbreds are considered a hot blood, high-spirited breed, and they're also a light horse breed, just like the quarter horse. So not like draft horses or anything like that, like a Clydesdale. So thoroughbreds are primarily racehorses. In the United States, they race on the flat. In the UK, in the United Kingdom, they're actually used in steeplechasing, which requires a lot of jumping. And they are actually used for dressage some by the U.S. Olympic team. They've been pretty successful there. The foundation stock for this breed is English mares that were bred with 3 imported Arabian stallions. Thoroughbreds usually stand between 15.2 and 17 hands, so they can be fairly tall. And they come in many colors as well. The third most popular is the standardbred, which is also a light horse breed. It originated in the U.S. as a harness racing horse, and its foundation stock was quite a bit of different breeds. So I won't read all of those to you. You can see those there. And they stand between 14.1 and 17 hands. So there's quite a range on how tall they can be, a little bit larger range than the thoroughbreds. And they primarily come in bay, black, brown, chestnut, gray, and the roan color. The major pacing event for standardbreds is the Meadowlands Pace. So they're most often used in these races where they pull these carts and they race that way. So the Appaloosa has a distinctive dark or mottling spots in the coat, so they're pretty easy to distinguish from other breeds. You can see this picture here. They almost kind of look like a Dalmatian, but a horse. So they originated in the northwest of North America, and likely from descendants of light horses that were brought to the Americas by the Spanish. So they're also a light horse breed. They're primarily used for pleasure riding, showing, racing, parades, and as stock horses. Registered Appaloosa horses must have 2 Appaloosa parents or 1 Appaloosa parent plus a parent from an approved breed. So there are some restrictions on which Appaloosa horses you can actually register. Arabians are the next one that we're going to discuss, and they're a little bit shorter than the rest of the breeds that we've talked about. They are one of the oldest breeds to have come about, and they're small to medium in size. They range from 14.1 to 15.1 hands, and some of them are now between 15 and 16 hands, so you may find some that are a little bit larger. They're mainly bay, gray, or chestnut with a few white or black in color, and they're a very versatile breed of light horses. They can be used for light cavalry, pleasure riding, dressage, racing, showing, long-distance racing, and as stock horses. So just a few other breeds that I'll just run through kind of quickly. So there's miniature horses that are defined by their height. The American Miniature Horse Association, or AMHA, defines miniature horses as not more than 34 inches at the withers. Then there are ponies that are excellent for children learning to ride. Remember that ponies are less than 14.2 hands is how they're classified. And there are numerous breeds, including the Shetland and the Welsh ponies. Tennessee walking horses are another important breed that are good for all ages and levels of experience, and those are primarily found in Middle Tennessee. And then Clydesdales that are draft or heavy horses over 18 hands in height, and their kind of claim to fame is the Budweiser commercials that everyone loves during the Super Bowl. So those are fairly well known as well. So a little bit about locomotion or gait in horses. How do they move? What are their different gaits that they have? So, of course, walking is the main one. Walking is when one foot is off the ground at a time with a sequence that goes from the left hind leg to the left front leg, the right hind leg to the right front leg in a regular 1, 2, 3, 4 beat, and that's usually at about 4 miles per hour. Trotting is another gait that's a 2-beat diagonal gait, so the left front and right rear legs will move in unison, as do the right front and left rear legs. So you'll kind of have 2 legs off the ground at one time while 2 are hitting the ground. So it's a 2-beat diagonal gait, and that can be about 8 miles per hour. Cantering is a 3-beat gait, so you have 3 legs moving forward in the air that are not in contact with the ground at the same time, with either of the back legs propelling the horse forward. So it's faster than the trot and the walk. And then the fastest gait that you have is galloping, which is a 4-beat gait that's used in horse races. And horses that are galloping can reach speeds of 55 miles per hour. So the maximum speed of a quarter horse would be 55 miles per hour. Like I've already mentioned a little bit, horses can be used for many different things. They can be used in horse racing, horse shows, rodeos, pleasure riding, endurance riding. They can also be used as work animals for herding cattle, or as police horses in cities, things like that. Also as carriage horses. Sometimes if you go to a large city, they'll have the horses pulling the carriages around the city to kind of give tours. So lots of different uses there. So horses and ponies have a rather large economic and social impact. In 2005, there were around 3.6 million horses and ponies in the United States. So that's a pretty significant impact. In the early 2000s, horse racing employed 441,000 people and generated almost $35 billion. 4.3 million Americans ride for pleasure, with 3 million pleasure horses in the United States. And the pleasure horse industry employs over 300,000 people and generates about $30 billion a year. So there's different kinds of horse racing. You have thoroughbreds that race, and you also have quarter horses that race. You have the standardbred or harness racing, and that's where a horse pulls a two-wheeled streamlined vehicle carrying a sulky or race bike carrying a driver. So that was kind of that picture earlier that I showed you on the standardbred slide. Drug use and abuse is also a thing that you have to think about with racehorses, that people use them in the wrong way. Some drugs are legal, like Lasix and Butte, and horses are routinely tested for drugs that could influence their race performance. So any steroids or anything like that, they would be tested for to make sure that they're not over the limits, or that they're not using them at all. Other use of horses, aside from races, are endurance rides, which are races over a trail of 50 to 150 miles, riding for the disabled, improving physical and mental health of people with handicaps with therapeutic riding, so therapy horses. Horses can be used for crowd control. They can be used by the police and the military to get unruly crowds under control. So that's a good use there. And kind of while we're on the subject of horses, we're just going to talk just a little bit about donkeys. So donkeys were used extensively in agriculture and as well as for transportation. They were domesticated from both African wild ass and the Nubian wild ass. So those are its ancestors. And close to a donkey, but different slightly, is a mule. So a mule is a cross or hybrid between a male donkey and a female horse. Mules can be used to pull a plow or cart, or be ridden or used as pack animals. So they typically can carry goods on their backs for decent amounts of travel. The country with the most mules is China. And something that's really important to note about mules is this term hybrid vigor. So hybrid vigor is an improvement in qualities that arises from crossbreeding genetically different plants or animals. So hybrid vigor is really important because animals that have hybrid vigor exhibit hardiness, and they can resist the sun as well as heat and disease. So those are some kind of hybrid vigor attributes that the mule has compared to the donkey or the horse. They're a little bit hardier and more resistant to heat and things like that than either one of the species that it was bred from. So that's a really good term to know. Mules can be either male or female, but they're normally sterile with either very low fertility or completely infertile. And that comes from the fact that mules have a different number of chromosomes from both donkeys and horses. So because donkeys and horses, when they mate, they produce this different number of chromosomes, the mule is not able to mate with either one of them. So some consequences that would come from the decline in horse and mule numbers. Horse and mule numbers have declined by 80% since the beginning of the 20th century. Land that was previously used for their forage and pasture needs has been freed up because they're not there. The increase of number of horses for recreation, and green fields that are kept for pasture in rural areas together with the outer suburbs. And that is all I have for chapter 5. So now we're going to move on to chapter 6. All right. So chapter 6 is going to cover companion animals. So we're going to be talking about quite a few different species in this lecture, and I'm going to try to get through a good amount of it. We might get through all of it, but if not, that's okay. So the objectives of this chapter are to discuss cats and dogs, their numbers, classification and domestication, definitions and terminology, their uses, and then a little bit about reproduction and nutrition. We'll also talk a little bit about ferrets, rodents, pet birds, monkeys, and reptiles and amphibians. So a companion animal is defined by the ASPCA as a domesticated or domestic bred animal whose physical, emotional, behavioral, and social needs can be readily met as companions in the home or in close daily relationship with humans. So the first companion animal that we're going to discuss is cats. And cats are pretty widespread. There are 85 million cats in the USA. About 34% of all households have at least one cat. And about 84% of owned cats are spayed or neutered. There are also barn cats, etc., that may or may not be spayed or neutered, that kind of keep to themselves and may not have quite as much human contact, but they're still counted as companions. Cats make good companions, and they develop close relationships with people. They're affectionate and like being stroked. And I will say that from experience, that definitely depends on the cat. Anyone who has a cat would probably agree to that. But they do make really good companion animals. So just a little bit of nomenclature, how to name them, and terminology for cats that you need to know. Just be familiar with these terms. A queen is an adult female cat. A tom is an intact adult male cat. A gib is a castrated male. A dam is what you would call the mother of a litter, and a sire would be the father of a litter. And that those two terms are similar to a lot of species. Those are not really just specific to cats. Kittens are your young cats, obviously. Kittening is the process of giving birth, which is kind of an odd word, but that's what it is. And then feline is the adjective that people use to refer to cats. So cats are classified in the genus Felis and the species Catus. So that's kind of easy to remember. Feline cat, basically. They're from the family Felidae, which also includes the lion, tiger, leopard, jaguar, bobcat, cougar, and lynx. So quite a few members of that family. The ancestor of the cat is thought to be the Near East African cat, which I showed you a picture of, I think maybe in chapter 2 or 3. We talked about a little bit about domesticated animals. They were domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, which we already talked about, so you should be pretty familiar with that. And archaeologists actually unearthed a burial on Cyprus of a woman and a cat together from 9,500 years ago. So that proves that they were at least domesticated then, because otherwise, why would a woman be buried with a cat? So cats were domesticated to reduce problems of mice and rats infesting stored grain. So they were really helpful to cut down on rodents in that way. And then feral cats, we talked a little bit about feral animals earlier. Feral cats are domesticated cats that successfully reverted to the wild. And feral cat populations can be a bit of a problem because they can threaten other wildlife populations, including wild birds. They can also interbreed with the European wildcat. So feral cats are definitely something that populations may need to be controlled a little bit here or there if it gets out of control and they're hurting other populations of animals. You also have cats that are used for therapy. So the presence of docile or tame cats that like to be stroked can actually improve the quality of living for nursing home residents and hospital residents. So older people that may have had a pet earlier in life that are in a nursing home or somewhere like that, or in a hospital where they can't either get home to see their pet or no longer are able to take care of their pet, or even ones that didn't have a pet before. Therapy cats can be really, really good for improving their quality of life because something about stroking the animals and just being around another animal and that physical touch that a lot of older people in hospitals and nursing homes don't always get. So that's a big thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about cat reproduction and genetics, and this should be a term that you should be familiar with by this point. Cats are seasonally polyestrous, and they're also induced or reflex ovulators. So seasonally polyestrous, just to remind you, means that they will have multiple estrous cycles during a particular part of the year, so similar to the horse. And induced or reflex ovulators means that they will ovulate only after mating. So they don't ovulate like other animals do, just kind of, spontaneously throughout the cycle. It's only after mating. Their gestation length is about 60 days, and their kittens are born in an immature state, which is known as altricial, and that's another term that I would kind of like you to be familiar with. So altricial means that they're very immature and they have a limited capacity to see and move around. So kittens, when they're born, really need to be protected by their mother because they can't really defend themselves. They can't see very well. So that's very important that they're kept in a safe place until they're old enough to be able to take care of themselves. Cats have 38 chromosomes, so 19 pairs of chromosomes. They can be either short-haired or long-haired. And just for your reference, and so you know, the short-haired genotype is the dominant genotype. So you'll probably see more cats that actually have short hair than you see with long hair. The long-haired genotype is recessive, and a single gene locus controls the hair length. So in order to have a long-hair genotype, you would need them to be homozygous for that gene. And a series of genes actually control coat color. So there are quite a few genetic abnormalities that cats can have. The Manx cat lacks a tail, so they're heterozygous for the trait, so they have one copy of the mutated gene, and that is enough to cause them to not have a tail. Heterozygous means hetero is different and then homo is the same, obviously. So heterozygous for the trait means they have one copy of the mutated gene and then one copy of the normal gene. Homozygous for the trait, so where they have two copies of the mutated gene, is lethal. So cats that have two copies will not survive. Scottish fold is another genetic abnormality that I actually think is pretty cute. When I learned about that in college, I thought they were adorable. So Scottish folds actually have a unique ear fold, and I think I have a picture of one a little bit later to show you, but their ears actually fold kind of forward. And then the Munchkin cat is a form of dwarfism, so these cats have extremely short legs, a lot shorter than normal cats, so maybe kind of a little equivalent to like a corgi dog. They're just a lot shorter. Polydactyly is another abnormality that can happen, and that is when a cat has extra digits. So they may have 6, 7, or even more toes, and that's actually a relatively common trait in the US, so it's not quite as rare as some of the other ones. So on to nutrition. Cats are classified as carnivores that can live on a meat-only diet, so they do not need plants in their diet to survive. They have a diet or need a diet with high amounts of carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And one important thing to point out with cats is that taurine is an essential amino acid for cats. So cats cannot synthesize this, which is why it's essential. Essential means that it can't be made in the body and it must be provided in the diet. So because they can't synthesize it, it has to be included in any food that they eat. And this is the main reason why you can't feed dog food to cats, because dogs do not require taurine in their diet the way cats do. So if you feed your dog food to your cat and that's all they get and they're not getting any taurine, they could have deficiency symptoms and it could cause a lot of medical problems. So that's a really important thing, to always make sure that your cat is getting taurine in their diet. So diets in cats usually contain more nutrients than are required, and this can lead to obesity. So when a diet has a lot more energy or fat in it than the animal needs, all of that extra fat and everything, is all of that extra nutrition is going to go towards adipose tissue, and they're going to become fat. So about 1/3 of all domestic cats in the US are overweight or obese. And this can have long-term health consequences, and those include diabetes, lower UTIs, or urinary tract disease, hepatic lipidosis, which would be fattening of the liver, and lameness due to arthritis in cats. So just to show you a few little cat breeds, I kind of picked the ones that I thought were the cutest and the most interesting because the Cat Fanciers Association recognizes and registers 41 pedigreed breeds. So we're not going to talk about all of them. So I just kind of wanted to show you some pictures of some of the more unique breeds. So here's the Scottish Fold. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, they have the curled ears. The American Curl is kind of the opposite of that, so their ears curl backwards. And then here's the Manx cat that we talked about, where they have one copy of the mutated gene that causes them to not have a tail. But they're kind of cute. So now we're going to talk about dogs. So there are 73 million dogs in the US. 39% of households have at least one dog, so a few more households have dogs than cats. More than 70% of the owned dogs are spayed or neutered, which is good. But that does leave 30% of dogs that can and will breed. So that can be a problem because there are a lot of dogs that are living by themselves that have to be taken into shelters and euthanized. So that 30% is quite substantial. And dogs can be abandoned for many reasons. People didn't expect that the puppy was going to require that much attention, or they moved to a place that doesn't allow animals. Many different issues there. But it's estimated that up to 2 million dogs are killed each year in the US because they don't have homes. So that's a really big thing to think about and consider. And if you have room, adopt a dog. They make excellent companion animals. They can be very loyal and affectionate. And some terminology and nomenclature for dogs that I would kind of expect you to be familiar with. A bitch is an adult female dog, and a dog is an adult male dog. Dam and sire are terms that we saw with cats. So dam is the mother, sire is the father. Pups or puppies are young dogs that are less than a year old. Whelping is the process of giving birth, so that's a little bit different to remember, other than kittens and kittening. You have pups and whelping. And then canine is an adjective that refers to dogs. Dogs are traditionally classified as Canis familiaris, so that's their genetic name. They could be considered a subspecies of the gray wolves, which are Canis lupus familiaris. So that's another way that they can be classified. So the Canis genus includes wolves, jackals, coyotes, and interbreeding of all of those members can produce fertile hybrids. So like we talked about in the horse lecture, mules are hybrids, but they're not fertile because of the difference in chromosome numbers between donkeys and horses. However, wolves, jackals, coyotes, and dogs could all produce fertile hybrids. So I know we've talked about this a little bit in previous lectures. We're going to go a little bit more into detail now. So dogs were domesticated from the gray wolves. Remember, they were the first animal to be domesticated at least 15,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers in East Asia. And it's possible that there were multiple domestication events. So it wasn't necessarily kind of an all-or-nothing kind of event. It probably happened in different locations at different times. They accompanied humans as they crossed the Bering Strait into North America 14,000 years ago. So that's how they got into North America. So how did domestication occur? So wolf packs would live in close proximity to groups of hunter-gatherers to scavenge for their waste. So any carcasses or anything like that, that the people didn't finish eating all of it or anything that was left over, wolf packs would be attracted to that. So the taming of orphan wolf pups by children is thought to have been fairly likely, that maybe with these wolves living close by, some kids or even adults maybe stumbled upon some wolf pups and were able to domesticate them from that young stage. And then over time, they could have been selected for reduced aggressiveness or tameness. So the ones that were more tame would have kind of been kept as pets, and then more animals would have been bred from those. So that's how it's thought that domestication of the wolf into the dog happened. So working dogs can be important for herding cattle and sheep. Hunting, they hunt birds, fox, raccoons, miss anything really. They are good guards. You always hear of people having guard dogs, so they can protect people, property. They can also protect livestock from things like coyotes. They can be used in racing, especially greyhounds are kind of popular for that. So then you have sleds, which the track racing would be more greyhounds, and then sleds would be kind of your huskies maybe and sled dogs. And then they can also be used for fighting, which is illegal in the U.S. So that's not really a typical use. Other working dogs include sniffers. So you have dogs that can sniff out drugs, weapons, cadavers, or people. And I know that they actually, when I was in high school, we had some of those dogs come and try to sniff out some things. And then I know they have dogs like that at the airport that will sniff your bags when you get back from, especially another country. So those dogs are really important. Also have dogs that can sniff out bombs. And then you have police dogs or canines, which can be very helpful there. Military dogs, which are probably the ones that can sniff out bombs and things like that. And then you have service or assistance animals. So you have seeing eye dogs for blind people, dogs that for people that are deaf. I've actually seen some dogs that can be given to people with epilepsy who have seizures, because the dogs can kind of sniff out when a seizure is about to happen and make sure that person is in a safe place and let the person know like that that's about to happen. So it's pretty incredible. And then in addition to those service dogs, you have therapy dogs. So therapy dogs are a little bit different from service dogs in that therapy dogs don't really necessarily have to be completely trained. So just a little bit more on that. Like I just said, they're not specifically trained for one purpose or another. They're not trained to like lead someone across the street or anything like that. Therapy dogs are basically just dogs that are very docile, friendly, and interact well with people. And like cats that we talked about a little bit earlier, they are commonly used in nursing homes to improve the quality of life. So that, the petting motion kind of helps work people's muscles in the arms, and then that physical touch that a lot of elderly people don't have. And then pretty much just seeing a dog or a cat will really brighten your day if you are in a nursing home or hospital and you don't get the chance to interact with animals. Dogs have 78 chromosomes, so they have 39 pairs. They have an extremely large variation in size, coat, and behavior. So contrary to cats, there are a lot of different breeds of cats, but for the most part, cats are fairly similar in size. You do have some larger breeds like the Maine Coon cat, but there's a larger variation in size in dogs because you think about, like a Chihuahua versus a Great Dane. So huge difference there. So about 94% of the dog's genes are in the same order as in the human and mouse genomes. So that's kind of an interesting fact. And breed parentage can be identified in dogs by DNA analysis, which is kind of cool. I know now, especially if you have a mutt like I do, you can actually order a kit and send off your dog's DNA, and they will send you back the DNA analysis that tells you all the breeds that make up your dog. So it's kind of cool. There are estimated to be between 350 and 400 different breeds. So that's a large difference from the number of cat breeds. The most modern breeds have been around for less than 400 years. So that's been, a lot of the breeds have come about through selection fairly recently compared to the other domestication events that happened. Dogs can only be registered if both parents are registered, so that is one restriction on that. And the American Kennel Club, or AKC, recognizes only 150 of those 350 to 400 breeds. So the AKC has different breed groups that it recognizes, and that includes sporting, working, terrier, toy, non-sporting, herding, and then a miscellaneous category. So a little bit about dog reproduction. Dogs are monoestrous, which means that one estrus cycle is followed, if they're not pregnant, by a period of anestrus or reproductive quiescence for about 6 months. So if they do not get pregnant, then it's followed by this period of kind of downtime where they're not actually having a cycle. And their gestation of 52 to 58 days is not too long, and they typically have about 6 puppies per litter, and that is just an average number. That can really vary. I've seen dogs have 1, I've seen dogs have 9, so that 6 is kind of just an average number there. So dog cloning has actually happened before, which is pretty cool. So the first dog was cloned in 2005 at the Seoul National University in Korea. And that dog that was cloned was Snuffy, the Afghan hound, or Snuppy, sorry, the Afghan hound. And you can see this is just a picture of, I guess this one is Snuppy, or maybe Snuppy is the one they cloned, or maybe they're both Snuppy. I guess they are the same dog. So yeah, that's just a picture of that. So that's pretty cool. And just to kind of throw out what you may have heard about before, the first cloned mammal was actually a sheep named Dolly. But since we're talking about dogs, there it is. So a little bit about dog nutrition. So dogs are kind of on the fence between carnivore and omnivore. Some places you'll see them classified as a carnivore, other places may classify them as an omnivore. So it's kind of important to know that they are on the line and that they're not strictly a carnivore or an omnivore necessarily. They can kind of be both. So they're largely carnivorous, but they can thrive on food other than meat. Therefore, they can be considered omnivores because they can do fairly well on plants. They're monogastrics, same as the cat and the horse, so they have one simple stomach. Their digestive system is actually pretty similar to people. They require protein, energy as carbohydrate, and fat, together with a proper balance of minerals and vitamins. So just to kind of give you a picture of the dog's digestive system, similar to the horse, you have the long esophagus, which goes to the stomach. You have the liver that's kind of over top of that. And then you have the small intestine and the large intestine. And what's different from the horse is that you can see that the dog doesn't have a very large cecum that's going to be used for fermentation or anything like that. So that's one difference between the horse and dogs and cats. And cats' digestive systems look very similar to this. So attention should be paid to the amount of food given to a dog. Make sure that dogs don't have access to excess feed, because some dogs will just eat and eat and eat until they get so full and then they get sick. And obesity can also be a problem in dogs. It's also important to note that not all people food is safe for dogs. There are several people food items that you could feed your dog that's not good. Chicken bones, for example, grapes, onions, chocolate's an obvious one. And some breeds are more sensitive to these than others, and sometimes smaller dogs can be a little more sensitive than large dogs. But that is really important to know, that if you have a dog and you are feeding it food from the table, just get on the internet and educate yourself on which foods are safe to feed your dog and which ones are not. And more often than not, if your dog eats a grape, it's not going to die. But if it's a smaller dog and it eats, a whole bag of grapes, that could be an issue. So just kind of be aware of that, and don't just feed them, crazy amount of people food. For neonatal puppies, there are milk replacer formulas that are available. However, these are not as rich in nutrients as their mother's milk. Obviously, mother's milk is the better choice there, but if something happens and you need milk replacer formula, that's available. Much like cats, obesity in dogs can also happen. The incidence of obesity in U.S. dogs is between 20 and 40%, and that's mainly caused by overfeeding. So high-calorie snacks, treats, and people food coupled with inactivity. So one thing to really be careful about is, I know sometimes dogs will become overweight because people will feed them a certain amount, but then during the day, they might be giving them treats. And a lot of times with treats, you're not really keeping track of how many treats you're giving them. And a mistake that a lot of people make is that when they give a lot of treats during the day, they're not cutting back on the actual food that they're giving them at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. So if you are going to feed treats, make sure to kind of compensate that with what you're feeding them for breakfast or dinner. And people food can be extremely high in calories as well if you're feeding them, a lot of bread and things like that. Same as for people, it has a lot of calories, so just be aware that if you're feeding them a lot, then you need to cut back on other things that you're feeding them. Effects of obesity include reduced lifespan, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and arthritis. So obesity in dogs is just, it's a really big thing. It can cause a lot of problems. It can also make it harder if they need surgery, because the vets will have to actually get past a huge layer of fat to be able to operate. So it's just not a good situation. And most people have dogs, so it's a good thing to be aware of. If your dog is obese, and especially an older dog that is kind of becoming more inactive, there are low-caloric dog foods available for dogs that do not get a lot of exercise. So if your dog needs to start losing weight, that's something you could look into. So now just some other companion animals that we're going to discuss. Ferrets are a companion animal that's kind of popular in the U.S. There are more than 1 million ferrets kept as pets in 2007. They were domesticated European polecats, and they were domesticated as early as 2400 BC. Ferrets are carnivores, like cats. They can be used for rabbit hunting. They're not legal as pets in California, so some states may have restrictions on certain animals you can keep as pets. I think in Georgia you can't have hedgehogs as pets or something like that, or I think that was a rule. It may not be anymore, but I heard that at some point. So that's important to be aware of if you are going to get kind of a more exotic pet. Make sure it's legal in your state. Ferrets are induced ovulators, like the cat, so they'll ovulate after mating or during mating, with gestation of 40 to 44 days, and they usually have a litter of 8 to 10 kids. Rodents, there's quite a few different species that are in this category. So there's a growing interest in gerbils being kept as pets. Gerbils are fairly easy to take care of. Some of them may be aggressive, especially when they're pregnant or that's supposed to say lactating females, because they kind of might be a little bit more on edge. And if they're lactating, that means that they've already had their babies, and they might be more aggressive and more prone to bite during that time. Gerbils, hamsters, guinea pigs, or cavies, chinchillas, rats, and mice are all in the rodent category. They can all be kept as pets. So just make sure if you want one of those as a pet that you're aware of their natural habits. I know chinchillas are nocturnal. So I knew someone that had a chinchilla, and it kept them up all hours of the night. So make sure if you're going to get a pet that you know everything you need to know up front. There are about 2 million pet rodents in the U.S., and they're typically kept in cages or aquaria with sawdust, wood shavings, or shredded newspaper for bedding that can be removed and cleaned when necessary. So rodents can come in different colors. Similarly to other mammals, rodents can have either of two pigments in their fur. So they can either have a black pigment or a yellow pigment, and then white or albino is due to the lack of pigmentation. So rodents can actually have patches of color on their body. They don't necessarily have to be all black or all yellow, and their color is genetically controlled with genes for each pigment. So rodent nutrition is very important. There are commercially available feeds that will meet their requirements, and these diets are specifically formulated for each species. And I would like to stress that, because each animal has its own nutritional requirements as far as what's essential for them and what's not. Just like how dog food shouldn't be fed to cats because of the taurine that they need. If you have any sort of rodent or any animal, it needs to have a diet that's been specifically formulated for that species. So you wouldn't feed a rat a chinchilla diet because the requirements are going to be different. And especially with minerals and vitamins, you can run into a lot of problems there. So rodent feed is typically in pellet form. These are just a couple pictures of some diets that are available. I know Missouri makes a lot of diets. I actually worked at a zoo, and we fed kangaroo feed that was made by them. So they make diets for quite a range of species. So a little bit about pet rodent and human health. So rodents may carry diseases such as viruses and bacteria. The bacteria could include Campylobacter and Salmonella, which are two big ones, that can cause illness in people. So it can cause anything from fever, vomiting, abdominal cramps, any kind of symptoms like that. So the Center for Disease Control, or the CDC, recommends that pregnant women and people with weakened immune systems not bring a new rodent into their home. and probably not visit your friend's pet rodent either. Just stay away from them during that time. And an important thing is to always wash hands after you've handled pet rodents, because you don't want to get any of that bacteria or anything on your hands and then touch your face. So there are a lot of animals that can be used as laboratory animals. Some of the more common are rats and mice. Hamsters are kind of in third place there. And they're widely used as research animals. And there's a number of reasons why. You can get a lot of them quickly. They have a very short gestation. So you can do a lot of research with them faster than you can with other animals. And they're fairly easy to acquire. So rats have been bred in captivity for about 150 years. A little bit about rat and mice reproduction. Their estrus cycle is 4 to 5 days. Their gestation length is 21 to 23 days. So compared to the other species that we've looked at, their gestation length is extremely short. So if you were doing a research study where you wanted to look at something that happens during gestation or something like that, you would be able to get results very fast with a rat or a mouse. The litter size of the mouse is 4 to 12 pups, and the litter size of the rat is 6 to 12 pups. So a little bit of variation there. So hamsters are another popular pet. There are several species of hamsters that are actually kept as pets. There's the golden or Syrian hamster, the Chinese hamster, dwarf hamsters, which sound adorable, and I wish I had looked up a picture of one. Hamsters are rodents and are also widely used as lab animals. Like I said, they're the third most popular animal used in research, and there are about 0.8 million pet hamsters in the U.S. Guinea pigs are another one, and they were domesticated in the Andes in South America. There are about 0.6 million pet guinea pigs in the U.S., so just a little bit less than the hamster. Their estrus cycle is 15 to 17 days. Gestation is 68 days, so a little longer than the mouse and the rat. Their litter size is fairly small, with 2 to 5, and they can be used as research models for human diseases. Unlike most animals, guinea pigs require vitamin C in their diet, so that's just something that's unique to them. So I can't stress enough, make sure if you have a guinea pig, you have a diet formulated for a guinea pig, because other diets may not include that vitamin C that they need, and that's really important. Birds are also another companion animal that are fairly common. There are about 11.2 million pet birds in the U.S., and 4% of households have at least one bird. So a couple of species, you have parrots that are typified by their ability to learn words. They can talk to you, which is pretty cool. Some other birds as well, not just parrots. Parakeets are small or medium-sized parrots that have long tails. And then budgies are the most common species of parrot that's kept as a pet. And an important thing to consider with birds that I actually had not thought about until in college, I took a companion animal class, that a lot of birds have a very, very long lifespan. So birds are a much larger commitment in that way than a dog or a cat, because they can live a very long time. My professor actually made a joke about people having to leave notes about their birds and things to their birds in their will, because the bird would actually be around longer than they would, depending on when they got it. So that's always something that I feel like a lot of people may not necessarily know, but it's important to consider. If you are getting a bird, you're committing to that bird for a very long time. Monkeys, about 15,000 monkeys are kept as pets in the U.S., and monkeys are a tremendous responsibility. Monkeys are extremely smart and cute. However, monkeys actually can be fairly aggressive sometimes. They can also carry diseases. So it's really important that if you have a monkey, that you have the proper cage and everything set up for it, because they are a lot to deal with. It's illegal to own monkeys as pets in a number of U.S. states, and that's actually probably a good rule. I've worked with several monkeys at zoos, and they can actually be quite dangerous despite how cute some of them are. So efforts to ban monkey ownerships in other states have been underway. Some states require that you have a permit so that it's known that you have that animal, because if it gets out or anything like that or hurts another person, that can be a big problem, because monkeys carry a variety of zoonotic diseases that can be transmitted to humans. So that's an issue that definitely needs to be considered. Reptiles and amphibians are also kept as pets. So lizards, snakes, turtles, frogs, and other reptiles and amphibians can be included in that category. Turtles, there are about 2 million in the US that are kept as pets. Snakes, there are about 586,000 snakes in the US that are kept as pets. Which I would not, because I'm terrified of snakes. I hate them. And then lizards, there are about 1.08 million in the US. And numerous ornamental fish are kept as companion animals as well. A good amount of people have, little aquariums or betta fish or things like that. So fish are pretty popular. And that is all I have for the companion animal lecture. So don't forget, as a reminder, that your assignment, the career assignment, is due by tomorrow night at 11:59 p.m. So please get that in. I'm thinking on Tuesday, since your test is coming up on Thursday, I would like to do a review on Tuesday to kind of go back through all of the lectures that we've talked about just very quickly, so that if you have any questions on any material, you can stop me as I'm going through it, or you can ask at any point. And then to kind of point out some things that I think are important that I'll probably be asking you on the exam, and then explain a little bit more about the exam format and how that's going to look and how it's going to work. And then for those of you that are listening online, I've emailed all of you. If you're not able to come to one of the campuses to take your exams and you need to find another proctor, it could be, at a local library, at another school, at a high school, please email me, because there's a form that you need to have your proctor fill out prior to taking the test. So if you have not emailed me back yet, please do that, because I need to go ahead and get those forms in before the test next week. But with that, if anybody has any questions, please email me, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.